What happens when you spend 3 years building a revolutionary system that transforms your company into an industry leader, only to watch your boss hand it over to his unqualified girlfriend? Well, let me tell you about the day I decided to teach them both a lesson they'd never forget. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I stared at my computer screen, watching lines of code scroll past like digital rain. It was 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, and the TechFlow Solutions office in downtown Seattle was empty except for me and the security guard making his rounds. This had become my routine over the past 3 years, staying late, coming in early, and dedicating every waking moment to perfecting what would become known as the Nexus Analytics platform. My name is Marcus Chen, and I was the senior software architect at TechFlow Solutions, a mid-sized data analytics company that specialized in helping Fortune 500 companies optimize their supply chains. When I joined the company in 2019, we were struggling to compete with the bigger players like IBM and Oracle. Our client retention rate was abysmal, our software was outdated, and frankly, we were on the verge of bankruptcy. That's when I pitched my idea to the CEO, Robert Hawkins. The Nexus Analytics platform would be a complete game changer, a machine learning-powered system that could predict supply chain disruptions with 94% accuracy, something that had never been achieved before in the industry. It would integrate seamlessly with existing enterprise software, provide real-time visualizations, and most importantly, it would be scalable enough to handle the data volumes of the world's largest corporations. Robert was skeptical at first. The development costs would be enormous, and the timeline I proposed was ambitious: 3 years to build something that typically took teams of hundreds to accomplish. But I convinced him that with the right resources and a small, dedicated team, we could pull it off. The potential return on investment was staggering. If successful, the Nexus platform could generate over $50 million in annual recurring revenue within 5 years. The early days were grueling. I assembled a team of 5 brilliant developers. Sarah Kim, a front-end specialist who could make any interface look like a work of art. David Rodriguez, a database architect who understood data structures better than anyone I'd ever met. Jennifer Walsh, a machine learning expert with a PhD from MIT. Alex Thompson, a cybersecurity specialist who ensured our platform was bulletproof. And Rebecca Foster, a quality assurance engineer who caught bugs that would have taken months to discover. We worked in what we called the bunker, a converted storage room on the 3rd floor that Robert had grudgingly allocated to our project. The space was cramped, the air conditioning barely worked, and the carpet had mysterious stains that nobody wanted to investigate. But it was ours, and we transformed it into our digital fortress. The first year was all about laying the foundation. We built the core architecture, established the data pipelines, and created the initial machine learning models. Every day brought new challenges: integration issues with legacy systems, memory leaks that would crash the entire platform, and algorithms that worked perfectly in testing but failed spectacularly with real-world data. I remember one particularly brutal week in November 2020 when we discovered a critical flaw in our prediction algorithm. The machine learning model was overfitting to historical data, which meant it was essentially useless for actual forecasting. We had to rebuild the entire neural network from scratch, working 18-hour days for 2 weeks straight. Sarah practically lived in the office, surviving on energy drinks and determination. David's wife threatened to file for divorce if he didn't come home for Thanksgiving dinner. But we pushed through because we all believed in what we were building. The breakthrough came in March 2021. Jennifer had been experimenting with a hybrid approach that combined traditional statistical methods with deep learning, and suddenly, our accuracy rates jumped from 67% to 91%. The entire team gathered around Jennifer's monitor, watching in amazement as the system correctly predicted a supply chain disruption at one of our test clients, a disruption that wouldn't actually occur for another 3 weeks. Robert was ecstatic when we demonstrated the improved system. He immediately approved additional funding and resources, and even gave us a proper office space on the 5th floor with actual windows and working air conditioning. The company's marketing department started preparing materials for what they called, quote, the revolutionary platform that will reshape the industry. By the end of 2021, we had our first major client success story. Global Tech Manufacturing, a $2 billion automotive parts supplier, had been struggling with frequent production delays due to unexpected supply chain issues. After implementing our Nexus platform, they reduced their supply chain disruptions by 78% and saved over $15 million in the first quarter alone. Word spread quickly through the industry, and suddenly, TechFlow Solutions was the company everyone wanted to work with. The accolades poured in throughout 2022. Trade magazines featured us on their covers, industry conferences invited me to speak about our innovative approach, and Harvard Business School wrote a case study about our transformation of TechFlow Solutions. The company's valuation increased from $12 million to over $180 million in just 2 years, and we were suddenly being courted by major investors and acquisition offers. But success brought new challenges. As the platform grew more sophisticated, the technical complexity increased exponentially. I found myself working even longer hours, not just writing code, but also managing the increasingly complex relationships between different system components. The platform now consisted of over 2.3 million lines of code, utilized 47 different APIs, and processed terabytes of data daily. The pressure was immense. Every bug fix had to be carefully tested to ensure it didn't break something else. Every new feature request had to be evaluated for its impact on system performance. I became obsessed with perfection, reviewing every line of code that went into production, personally testing every major update, and maintaining detailed documentation that would allow the system to be understood by future developers. My personal life suffered tremendously. I hadn't taken a real vacation in over 2 years. My relationship with my girlfriend Amanda ended when she accused me of being married to my computer. I missed my nephew's birthday party, my sister's wedding, and countless other family events, because I was always working on the next critical update or emergency bug fix. But I justified it all by telling myself that we were building something truly special. The Nexus platform wasn't just software. It was a revolutionary tool that was literally changing how global commerce operated. Companies that had struggled with supply chain management for decades were suddenly able to predict and prevent disruptions before they occurred. The economic impact was staggering. Our clients reported combined savings of over $200 million in the first year alone. The validation came in January 2023 when we received our first major industry award. The International Software Innovation Council named the Nexus Analytics Platform as the most transformative enterprise software solution of the year. I stood on that stage in Las Vegas, holding the crystal trophy, and felt like all the sacrifice had been worth it. TechFlow Solutions was now the undisputed leader in predictive supply chain analytics. We had over 200 enterprise clients, including 15 Fortune 100 companies. Our annual recurring revenue had grown from $3 million to over $45 million. The company had expanded from 30 employees to over 300, with offices in Seattle, New York, and London. But with success came new challenges that I hadn't anticipated. The bigger TechFlow became, the more corporate politics began to influence decision-making. Robert, who had once been directly involved in the technical aspects of the business, was now spending most of his time with investors and board members. The close-knit culture that had defined our early years was replaced by formal hierarchies and bureaucratic processes. New executives were hired to manage the growing organization, and many of them had little understanding of the technical complexities involved in maintaining and improving the Nexus platform. They spoke in buzzwords about synergies and optimization, but when it came to the actual nuts and bolts of software development, they were completely out of their depth. The most frustrating aspect was the constant pressure to add new features without considering the technical debt we were accumulating. Every client wanted customizations, every sales meeting resulted in promises of capabilities that didn't exist, and every board meeting included discussions about expanding into new markets without understanding the engineering challenges involved. I tried to maintain control over the technical direction of the platform, but it became increasingly difficult as the company grew. Other departments began making decisions that directly impacted the software without consulting the engineering team. The sales department would promise features that were technically impossible within the requested timeframe. The marketing department would make claims about the platform's capabilities that weren't entirely accurate. Despite these challenges, I remained committed to the vision we had established in those early days in the bunker. The Nexus platform was my life's work, and I was determined to ensure it continued to evolve and improve. I established rigorous code review processes, implemented comprehensive testing protocols, and created detailed documentation that would ensure the platform's long-term stability. The system had grown far beyond what any of us had originally envisioned. It now included advanced machine learning algorithms that could analyze millions of data points in real time, sophisticated visualization tools that could present complex information in intuitive formats, and integration capabilities that allowed it to work seamlessly with virtually any enterprise software system. The technical architecture was a marvel of modern software engineering. We had implemented a microservices architecture that allowed different components of the system to be updated independently. The database design utilized advanced indexing and caching strategies that ensured lightning-fast query performance even with massive datasets. The machine learning models were continuously retrained using the latest data, ensuring that prediction accuracy continued to improve over time. But perhaps most importantly, the platform had become truly intelligent. It didn't just predict supply chain disruptions, it could recommend specific actions to prevent them, optimize inventory levels based on predicted demand, and even suggest alternative suppliers when disruptions were unavoidable. This level of sophistication required constant refinement and optimization, work that could only be performed by someone who understood every aspect of the system's architecture. As 2023 progressed, I found myself increasingly isolated within the company. The original team members had been promoted to management positions or had left to pursue other opportunities. New developers were hired to work on the platform, but they lacked the deep understanding of the system's architecture that came from being involved in its creation. I became the sole keeper of the platform's most critical secrets, the algorithms that made the predictions possible, the integration points that allowed it to work with client systems, and the optimization techniques that kept it running efficiently under massive loads. This knowledge made me indispensable, but it also made me a target for those who wanted to claim credit for the platform's success. The warning signs were there, but I was too focused on the technical challenges to pay attention to the political maneuvering happening around me. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Robert's behavior had changed subtly over the past year. He was less available for technical discussions, more focused on high-level strategy meetings, and increasingly surrounded by new executives who seemed more interested in managing personalities than understanding the business. In retrospect, I should have seen what was coming. The company's success had attracted attention from investors and competitors alike, and with that attention came pressure to demonstrate that TechFlow's success wasn't dependent on any single individual. The board wanted to see a more distributed leadership structure, with multiple people capable of managing the technical aspects of the business. But I was too proud and too invested in the platform to consider that my position might be vulnerable. I had created something revolutionary, something that was generating tens of millions of dollars in revenue, and transforming an entire industry. Surely that would be enough to secure my place in the company's future. I was about to learn just how wrong I could be. The first hint that something was wrong came on a rainy Thursday morning in September 2023. I was reviewing the quarterly performance metrics when my assistant, Kelly Martinez, knocked on my office door with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of confusion and concern that immediately put me on edge. "Marcus, there's someone here to see you," she said, her voice unusually hesitant. "Robert wants you to meet the new Vice President of Product Development." I looked up from my monitor, puzzled. New VP? I wasn't aware we were hiring for that position. Kelly shifted uncomfortably. Her name is Victoria Sterling. She's in conference room A with Robert right now. The walk to conference room A felt longer than usual. My mind raced through possibilities. Had the board decided we needed additional leadership? Was this part of some reorganization I hadn't been informed about? The questions multiplied with each step. When I opened the conference room door, I found Robert sitting at the head of the long mahogany table, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something that looked almost like guilt. Beside him sat a woman I'd never seen before. Tall, blonde, probably in her early 30s, wearing an expensive-looking navy blazer and a smile that seemed to know secrets I didn't. "Marcus!" Robert stood up quickly, his voice carrying an artificial enthusiasm that immediately raised red flags. "I'd like you to meet Victoria Sterling, our new Vice President of Product Development. Victoria, this is Marcus Chen, our Senior Software Architect and the brilliant mind behind the Nexus platform." Victoria extended her hand with practiced corporate precision. "Marcus, I've heard so much about you and your incredible work. I'm really looking forward to collaborating with you on taking the Nexus platform to the next level." Her handshake was firm, her eye contact direct, but something about her felt off. Maybe it was the way she spoke about the platform as if she already owned it, or the way Robert kept glancing at her with an expression I couldn't quite identify. "Nice to meet you, Victoria," I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral. "I wasn't aware we were expanding the leadership team. What's your background in predictive analytics?" A brief pause. "Well, I come from a strong strategic background. I spent 5 years at Meridian Consulting, where I specialized in business development and product strategy for tech companies. I have an MBA from Wharton, and I've been working closely with Robert for the past few months on analyzing our market position and identifying growth opportunities." Her answer was polished but vague. No mention of technical experience, no specific knowledge of machine learning or supply chain analytics, and certainly nothing that would qualify her to oversee the development of complex software systems. Robert jumped in quickly. "Victoria brings a fresh perspective to our product development process. She's been conducting a comprehensive analysis of our current offerings and has some fantastic ideas for enhancing the Nexus platform's market appeal." "That's interesting," I said carefully. "What kind of enhancements are you considering?" Victoria leaned forward, her confidence apparent. "Well, from what I've observed, there are several areas where we could improve user experience and expand our market reach. For instance, I think we should consider developing a mobile app version of the platform, maybe add some social features that would allow users to share insights, and definitely explore opportunities in the consumer market." I felt my stomach drop. A mobile app? Social features? Consumer market? These suggestions revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of what the Nexus platform was and who our clients were. Enterprise supply chain management software wasn't something you used on your phone while commuting to work, and Fortune 500 companies weren't interested in sharing their sensitive supply chain data on social networks. "Victoria," I said, trying to keep my voice patient, "the Nexus platform is enterprise-grade software that processes terabytes of sensitive corporate data. Our clients are multinational corporations that need industrial-strength security and performance. A mobile app would be—" "Marcus," Robert interrupted, his tone carrying a warning I'd never heard before. "Victoria has been hired specifically to bring new ideas to our product development process. I think it would be valuable for you to work with her on exploring these possibilities." The meeting continued for another 30 minutes, but I barely heard the rest of the conversation. My mind was spinning with implications. Victoria Sterling had been hired without my input, despite the fact that I was supposedly the technical leader of the company. Her suggestions demonstrated a complete lack of understanding of our technology and our market. And Robert was treating her ideas as if they were gospel, despite their obvious flaws. As we left the conference room, Robert pulled me aside. "Marcus, I need you to be supportive of Victoria. She's going to be working closely with you on some exciting new initiatives, and I want this transition to go smoothly." "Transition?" I asked. "What transition?" "Nothing dramatic," he said quickly. "Just some organizational changes to help us scale more effectively. We'll discuss it more in the coming weeks." That afternoon, I tried to focus on my work, but the encounter with Victoria kept replaying in my mind. I decided to do some research on her background, starting with a simple LinkedIn search. What I found was disturbing. Victoria Sterling's LinkedIn profile was impressive on the surface. Wharton MBA, 5 years at Meridian Consulting, various volunteer positions on nonprofit boards. But when I dug deeper, the details didn't add up. Her timeline at Meridian was vague, with no specific projects or achievements listed. Her previous positions were at companies I'd never heard of, and her recommendations were generic and unhelpful. More concerning was what I discovered about her personal life. A casual search revealed that she and Robert had been photographed together at several charity events over the past year. The photos showed them sitting together at dinner tables, standing close together at cocktail parties, and in one particularly telling image, Robert's hand was resting on her lower back in a gesture that seemed far too intimate for a professional relationship. The pieces were falling into place, and I didn't like the picture they were forming. Over the next few weeks, Victoria's presence in the office became increasingly prominent. She was given an office on the executive floor, directly across from Robert's. She attended meetings that had previously been limited to senior technical staff. Most concerning of all, she began asking detailed questions about the Nexus platform's architecture, demanding access to documentation that contained some of our most sensitive technical secrets. "I need to understand the system from the ground up," she explained during one particularly frustrating meeting. "How can I develop strategic initiatives if I don't have a comprehensive understanding of our technical capabilities?" I tried to explain that understanding enterprise software architecture required years of specialized training, but Victoria seemed to believe that her MBA and business experience were sufficient qualifications for overseeing technical development. The situation deteriorated rapidly. Victoria began scheduling meetings with my team members without including me, asking them to explain various aspects of the platform's functionality. She requested copies of our source code, claiming she needed to, quote, conduct a thorough analysis of our development processes. Most alarmingly, she started making suggestions for changes to the platform's core architecture, based on her superficial understanding of how it worked. "I think we should simplify the user interface," she announced during one team meeting. "All these graphs and data visualizations are too complicated. Why can't we just show users a simple red, yellow, or green status indicator?" David Rodriguez, my database architect, looked at me with an expression of pure disbelief. The complex visualizations that Victoria wanted to eliminate were precisely what made the Nexus platform so powerful. Our clients needed to see detailed data breakdowns, trend analyses, and predictive models. A simple traffic light system would be useless for managing global supply chains. "Victoria," I said, struggling to keep my frustration in check, "our clients are supply chain managers and logistics directors at Fortune 500 companies. They need detailed data to make informed decisions. Simplifying the interface would actually make the platform less valuable to them." "I disagree," she replied confidently. "User experience is critical in today's market. If we want to expand our customer base, we need to make the platform more accessible to non-technical users." The meeting ended with no resolution, but I could see the confusion and concern in my team members' faces. They had spent years building something sophisticated and powerful, and now someone with no technical background was suggesting fundamental changes based on misconceptions about what the platform actually did. That evening, I decided to have a frank conversation with Robert. I knocked on his office door at 7:30 p.m., knowing he usually stayed late on Thursdays. "Robert, we need to talk about Victoria's role in the product development process," I said, taking a seat across from his desk. He looked up from his computer with an expression I couldn't read. "What about it?" "She's making suggestions that demonstrate a fundamental misunderstanding of our technology and our market. The Nexus platform is enterprise software, not a consumer app. Her ideas about mobile versions and social features would be not only useless, but potentially dangerous for our clients." Robert leaned back in his chair. "Marcus, I understand that change can be difficult, but Victoria brings a strategic perspective that we've been lacking. Sometimes it takes an outsider to see opportunities that we miss when we're too close to technology." "This isn't about being close to technology," I replied, my voice rising slightly. "This is about understanding what our clients actually need. Victoria's suggestions would make the platform less effective, not more accessible." "I think you're being resistant to new ideas," Robert said, his tone becoming cooler. "Victoria has been conducting a comprehensive analysis of our market position, and her recommendations are based on solid business principles." "What analysis?" I asked. "She's been here for 3 weeks. How could she possibly understand our market position better than someone who's been building relationships with these clients for 3 years?" Robert's expression hardened. "Marcus, I'm going to be direct with you. The board has been asking questions about succession planning and organizational resilience. They're concerned that too much of our success depends on a single individual. Victoria's role is part of a broader strategy to ensure that TechFlow can continue to thrive regardless of personnel changes." The implication was clear, and it hit me like a punch to the gut. They were preparing to replace me. Are you telling me that my position is in jeopardy? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm telling you that the company is evolving, and everyone needs to adapt to that evolution. Victoria is going to be taking on more responsibilities in the product development area, and I need you to support that transition. I left Robert's office that night feeling like the ground had shifted beneath my feet. The company I had helped build, the platform I had created, the team I had assembled, all of it was being systematically taken away from me by someone whose only apparent qualification was her relationship with the CEO. The next few weeks were a nightmare of corporate politics and bureaucratic maneuvering. Victoria continued to insert herself into technical discussions, making suggestions that ranged from impractical to downright dangerous. She proposed removing security features that were required by our enterprise clients, eliminating redundancy systems that prevented catastrophic failures, and restructuring the database architecture in ways that would cripple performance. Worse still, Robert was supporting her initiatives, treating her opinions as if they carried the same weight as those of experienced engineers who had spent years working with enterprise software. When I pushed back on her suggestions, I was accused of being resistant to change and protective of my territory. The final straw came during a board meeting in early November. I wasn't invited to attend, but Kelly told me later that Victoria had given a presentation about modernizing the Nexus platform for the next generation of users. According to Kelly, Victoria had criticized the platform's current design as, quote, outdated and overly complex, and had proposed a complete overhaul that would make it more intuitive and user-friendly. The board, composed primarily of business executives with limited technical knowledge, had apparently been impressed by Victoria's presentation. They had authorized her to begin developing a modernization strategy that would guide the platform's future development. When I confronted Robert about this decision, he was surprisingly direct. Marcus, the board has decided that Victoria should take the lead on the Nexus platform's strategic direction. You'll continue to oversee the technical implementation, but all major decisions will need to be approved by Victoria. You're putting someone with no technical background in charge of a system she doesn't understand, I said, my voice shaking with anger. This is going to destroy everything we've built. That's your opinion, Robert replied coldly. The board disagrees. They believe Victoria's strategic vision is exactly what we need to take the platform to the next level. That night, I sat in my office staring at my computer screen, trying to process what had happened. In the span of 2 months, I had gone from being the indispensable architect of the company's most valuable asset to being a subordinate to someone whose qualifications were questionable at best. But it wasn't just my career that was at stake. The Nexus platform represented 3 years of my life, countless hours of work, and the dreams of a small team of dedicated engineers who had believed in creating something revolutionary. Now it was being handed over to someone who saw it as nothing more than a business opportunity to be exploited. As I walked through the empty office that night, I realized that I had a choice to make. I could accept the new reality, swallow my pride, and watch as Victoria slowly dismantled the platform I had created. Or I could take action to protect my life's work from being destroyed by corporate politics and personal ambition. The decision, when it came, was surprisingly easy. The next morning, I began documenting everything. Documentation became my obsession. Every email, every meeting transcript, every technical specification that had ever been written about the Nexus platform, I copied it all to encrypted drives that I kept in a safety deposit box downtown. But more importantly, I began creating something that would become my insurance policy, a comprehensive record of every single backdoor, administrative override, and emergency access protocol that existed within the system. The Nexus platform, like any enterprise software, contained multiple layers of security and access controls. Over the years, I had built in various emergency protocols that would allow authorized personnel to maintain the system during critical situations. These weren't vulnerabilities. They were legitimate administrative tools that were documented in our security protocols and approved by our compliance team. What wasn't documented, however, were the specific implementation details of these systems. The exact command sequences, the encryption keys, the server locations. This information existed only in my head, and in a series of encrypted files that I had created for disaster recovery purposes. As I worked through the nights of November 2023, I began to realize the full scope of what Victoria and Robert were planning. Through careful observation and strategic conversations with colleagues, I pieced together their timeline. Victoria wasn't just being positioned to oversee the platform's strategic direction. She was being groomed to replace me entirely. The evidence was everywhere once I knew what to look for. Victoria had been meeting with headhunters, interviewing candidates for what she described as technical leadership positions. She had been in discussions with outside consulting firms about conducting a quote technical audit of the platform. Most telling of all, she had been asking HR about the process for transitioning critical employees out of the organization. Sarah Kim, my former front-end specialist who had been promoted to team lead, confirmed my suspicions during a private conversation in the parking garage. "Marcus, I think you should know that Victoria called me into her office yesterday," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She asked me about the platform's architecture, about who had access to what systems, and about whether the team would be able to continue development if certain personnel were no longer available." "What did you tell her?" "I told her the truth, that you designed the core architecture, and that most of the critical systems require your direct oversight." She didn't seem pleased with that answer. Sarah hesitated before continuing. "There's something else." She asked me whether I would be interested in taking on additional responsibilities if a senior position became available. She said the company was looking for people who were ready to embrace new leadership and new directions. The picture was becoming crystal clear. Victoria and Robert weren't just planning to sideline me. They were planning to remove me entirely and replace me with someone who would be more compliant with their vision. The fact that they were targeting Sarah, who had the most technical knowledge after me, showed that they understood the platform's complexity enough to know they needed someone with actual skills to maintain it. But they had made a critical error in their planning. They assumed that the Nexus platform could be transferred to new leadership, the same way you might transfer ownership of a traditional business asset. They didn't understand that complex software systems aren't just collections of code. They're living, breathing ecosystems that require intimate knowledge of their internal workings to maintain and modify. The platform I had built wasn't just sophisticated, it was intricately interconnected in ways that took years to fully understand. Every component depended on every other component, and changes to one part of the system could have cascading effects throughout the entire architecture. This wasn't accidental complexity. It was the natural result of building something that could handle the enormous technical challenges of real-time supply chain prediction at global scale. Over the course of December 2023, Victoria's interference with the platform's development became increasingly aggressive. She began making direct demands for changes that would have required months of development work, without any understanding of the technical challenges involved. She insisted that the platform's response time could be improved by optimizing the code, as if optimization were a simple switch that could be flipped. "Why does it take 3 seconds to generate a supply chain prediction?" she asked during one particularly frustrating meeting. "Our clients expect instant results. Can't we just make it faster?" I tried to explain that the 3-second response time was actually a remarkable achievement, considering that the platform was analyzing millions of data points, running complex machine learning algorithms, and generating detailed predictions across multiple supply chain scenarios. Reducing that response time would require significant changes to the underlying architecture, changes that could take months to implement and test. "I don't understand why it's so complicated," Victoria replied. "It's just data analysis. Other companies do this kind of thing instantly." The meeting ended with Victoria demanding that I provide her with a detailed timeline for reducing response times to under 1 second, despite my explanations that such a timeline would be meaningless without a complete technical analysis of the proposed changes. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I began creating what I called the nuclear option, a comprehensive plan for completely shutting down the Nexus platform in a way that would make it impossible for anyone else to restore it to operational status. The plan wasn't simple destruction. That would have been crude and easily detected. Instead, I designed a sophisticated approach that would systematically corrupt the platform's core functionality while making it appear that the system was operating normally. The changes would be subtle at first, but they would cascade through the system over time, eventually rendering the entire platform useless. The beauty of the plan was that it would be nearly impossible to reverse without intimate knowledge of the platform's architecture. The corruption would be embedded deep within the system's core algorithms, spread across multiple servers, and protected by the same security measures that were designed to protect the platform from external attacks. But I wasn't ready to implement the nuclear option yet. I still hoped that Robert would come to his senses and recognize that Victoria's interference was destroying the platform's potential. I still believed that the success we had achieved together would be enough to protect the work we had done. That hope was shattered on January 15, 2024. I was working late in my office, reviewing the latest performance metrics from our European clients, when Robert walked in with an expression I had never seen before. He looked nervous, almost guilty, but also resolved. "Marcus, we need to talk," he said, closing the door behind him. "What about?" "The board met today, and we've made some decisions about the future direction of the company." He sat down across from my desk, his hands folded in his lap. Effective immediately, Victoria Sterling is being promoted to Chief Technology Officer. She'll be taking over all technical operations, including oversight of the Nexus platform. The words hit me like a physical blow. CTO. Victoria Sterling, who couldn't distinguish between enterprise software and a mobile app, was being put in charge of all technical operations at a company that had built its entire business on technical innovation. "That's impossible," I said, my voice barely controlled. "She doesn't have the qualifications to manage a technical team, let alone oversee the development of complex software systems." "The board disagrees," Robert replied. "They believe her strategic vision and business acumen are exactly what we need to scale our operations to the next level." "What about me?" Robert's pause was long enough to confirm what I already knew. "You're being offered a new position as senior technical consultant. You'll continue to work on the platform, but in a more focused capacity. You'll report to Victoria and provide technical expertise to support her strategic initiatives." I stared at him in disbelief. "You're demoting me?" "After everything I've built, after everything I've contributed to this company, you're making me a subordinate to someone who learned about our technology 3 months ago. I'm offering you a path to continue contributing to the company's success," Robert said, his voice taking on a defensive tone. "This isn't a demotion. It's a restructuring that will allow you to focus on what you do best while Victoria handles the strategic and managerial aspects of the role." "And if I refuse?" Another long pause. "Then I'm afraid we'll have to consider other options." The threat was clear. Accept the demotion, or be fired entirely. I looked at Robert, this man who had once been my partner in building something revolutionary, who had trusted me with his company's future, who had celebrated our successes together, and I realized that he was no longer the person I had known. The success of the Nexus platform had changed him, or perhaps it had simply revealed aspects of his character that had always been there. "I need time to think about this," I said finally. "Of course, take the weekend, but I'll need your decision by Monday morning." That weekend was the longest of my life. I walked through Seattle's rain-soaked streets, sat in coffee shops staring at nothing, and tried to imagine a future where I worked under Victoria Sterling's direction. The thought was nauseating. But more than my wounded pride, I was consumed by thoughts of what would happen to the Nexus platform under Victoria's leadership. She would make changes based on her superficial understanding of the technology. She would push for modifications that would compromise the system's stability and security. She would slowly destroy everything that made the platform special, replacing sophisticated functionality with simplified features that looked impressive to non-technical executives, but were useless to actual users. Our clients would suffer. The companies that had come to depend on the platform's predictions would find themselves with an inferior product that couldn't deliver the same level of accuracy and insight. The supply chain managers who had built their operations around our technology would be forced to find alternatives or accept degraded performance. Most importantly, the team that had worked so hard to build something revolutionary would be forced to watch as their creation was systematically dismantled by someone who didn't understand what they had built. By Sunday evening, I had made my decision. Monday morning, I walked into Robert's office and delivered my response. "I'll accept a consulting position," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But I have some conditions." Robert looked relieved. Of course. What do you need? I want to maintain access to all technical systems for the transition period. I want to be involved in any decisions that affect the platform's core architecture. And I want a written guarantee that no major changes will be made to the system without my technical review. That seems reasonable, Robert said. I'll have HR draft something up. But as I left his office, I knew that none of those conditions would be honored. Victoria would find ways to circumvent my oversight, and Robert would support her decisions. The written guarantee would be meaningless once they decided I was no longer necessary. That afternoon, I began implementing the nuclear option. The first phase was subtle, small modifications to the platform's logging systems that would make it difficult to trace problems back to their source. I altered the error reporting mechanisms to provide less detailed information about system failures. I modified the backup systems to introduce tiny inconsistencies that would accumulate over time. Each change was individually insignificant, but together they would create a cascade of problems that would be nearly impossible to diagnose and fix. The platform would continue to function normally for weeks or even months, but gradually, its performance would degrade in ways that would be attributed to increased load, external factors, or simple aging of the system. The second phase involved the platform's core algorithms. I introduced subtle biases into the machine learning models that would slowly reduce their accuracy over time. I modified the data processing pipelines to occasionally skip or duplicate certain calculations. I altered the prediction algorithms to introduce small random variations that would accumulate into significant errors. Again, each change was designed to be undetectable in the short term but devastating in the long term. The platform's prediction accuracy would gradually decline from 94% to 85%, then to 75%, then lower. By the time anyone noticed the problem, it would be too late to identify the source of the degradation. The third phase was the most sophisticated. I created what I called logic bombs, pieces of code that would activate under specific conditions and cause catastrophic system failures. These weren't simple time bombs that would go off on a specific date. Instead, they were triggered by complex combinations of factors: system load levels, database sizes, user activity patterns, and other variables that would ensure they activated only after I was no longer associated with the company. The logic bombs were designed to cause failures that would be blamed on external factors. One would activate when the platform was under high load, causing it to crash in a way that would be attributed to insufficient server capacity. Another would trigger when the database reached a certain size, causing data corruption that would look like a storage hardware failure. A third would activate when certain user activity patterns were detected, causing security protocols to fail in ways that would be blamed on external hacking attempts. Each logic bomb was carefully crafted to cause maximum damage, while providing plausible explanations that would misdirect any investigation away from deliberate sabotage. The implementation took 3 weeks of careful work. I wrote the code during late nights and early mornings, using my legitimate access to the system to introduce the modifications during routine maintenance windows. I was meticulous about covering my tracks, ensuring that the changes would be invisible to anyone who didn't know exactly what to look for. By February 15, 2024, the nuclear option was fully implemented and ready to activate. The Nexus platform was now a ticking time bomb, but one that would explode slowly and gradually, causing maximum damage to the company's reputation and Victoria's credibility. All I had to do now was wait. The waiting was the hardest part. Every day, I watched Victoria make decisions that demonstrated her fundamental incompetence, knowing that soon those decisions would be exposed for what they were. I attended meetings where she presented plans that would have been laughable if they weren't so dangerous, knowing that her leadership would soon be tested by challenges she couldn't possibly handle. But I also felt a growing sense of guilt about what I had done. The Nexus platform wasn't just Robert's and Victoria's project. It was also the work of dozens of talented engineers who had contributed their skills and creativity to building something special. When the platform failed, they would suffer too. The guilt was manageable, though, because I knew that the alternative was worse. Under Victoria's leadership, the platform would be destroyed anyway, just more slowly and incompetently. At least my approach would expose her incompetence quickly and decisively, potentially saving the company from years of decline under her leadership. On March 1st, 2024, I submitted my resignation. My resignation letter was deliberately brief and professional. After 3.5 years at TechFlow Solutions, I simply stated that I was pursuing new opportunities and would be available for a standard 2-week transition period. I made no mention of the toxic management situation, Victoria's incompetence, or Robert's betrayal. The letter was a masterpiece of corporate politeness that revealed nothing of the storm I had set in motion. Robert's reaction was exactly what I expected: relief mixed with poorly concealed satisfaction. He had successfully maneuvered me out of the company, while maintaining the pretense that it was my own decision. Victoria would now have complete control over the Nexus platform without the inconvenience of dealing with its original architect. "I'm sorry to see you go, Marcus," Robert said during our final meeting, his voice carrying all the sincerity of a used car salesman. "But I understand that sometimes people need new challenges. We're grateful for everything you've contributed to the company's success." Victoria, who attended the meeting as my supposed replacement, was less diplomatic. "I think this transition will be really positive for everyone," she said with barely concealed enthusiasm. Sometimes fresh perspectives are exactly what's needed to take a product to the next level. During my final 2 weeks, I watched with fascination as Victoria began implementing her vision for the platform's future. She assembled what she called a modernization task force, consisting of junior developers who had minimal experience with the platform's architecture. She scheduled meetings with consulting firms to discuss, quote, comprehensive system overhauls. Most entertainingly, she began making grand pronouncements about features that would be impossible to implement without fundamentally restructuring the entire system. "I want to add real-time collaboration features," she announced during one team meeting. "Users should be able to share their dashboards with colleagues and comment on specific data points, like a social media platform for supply chain data." Sarah Kim, who was still trying to be professional despite the absurdity of the situation, gently explained that such features would require significant changes to the platform's security architecture. Enterprise clients had strict requirements about data access and sharing, and adding social features would introduce vulnerabilities that could compromise sensitive corporate information. "That's exactly the kind of thinking we need to move beyond," Victoria replied confidently. "Security is important, but we can't let it prevent us from innovating. I'm sure there are ways to implement these features safely." I said nothing during these meetings, simply taking notes and nodding when appropriate. My role as a consultant was to provide technical guidance when requested, and Victoria had made it clear that she preferred to rely on her own judgment, rather than the advice of someone she considered part of the old guard. The platform continued to function normally during my final weeks, which only reinforced Victoria's confidence in her ability to manage the system. She began making small changes, updating user interface elements, modifying report formats, adjusting default settings, that had no impact on the platform's core functionality but made her feel like she was putting her stamp on the product. "See?" she said to Robert during one of their frequent meetings. "The transition is going perfectly. The platform is more stable than ever, and we're already implementing improvements that will enhance user experience." What Victoria didn't understand was that the changes I had implemented were designed to remain dormant for weeks or months. The platform's apparent stability was an illusion, like a building that looks perfectly sound even though its foundation has been systematically weakened. On my last day, March 15, 2024, I performed one final act that would ensure my handiwork remained undetected. I submitted a comprehensive technical report that documented all the recent changes I had made to the system. The report was dense, technical, and seemingly thorough, exactly the kind of documentation that would satisfy any auditor or compliance review. But the report was also a carefully crafted misdirection. It documented legitimate maintenance activities and minor optimizations, while completely omitting any mention of the logic bombs, algorithmic modifications, or system vulnerabilities I had introduced. Anyone reading the report would come away with the impression that I had been a model employee who had left the system in perfect condition. I also provided detailed instructions for several emergency procedures that I claimed would be necessary to maintain system stability during periods of high load or unusual activity. These procedures were actually designed to accelerate the activation of my sabotage mechanisms, but they were presented as standard maintenance protocols that any competent system administrator should be able to follow. "This documentation will be invaluable," Victoria said, as she reviewed my final report. "It shows that we have a complete understanding of the system's operational requirements." Robert was equally pleased. "This is exactly the kind of professional transition we were hoping for. It demonstrates that our succession planning was successful." I left TechFlow Solutions that evening with a strange mixture of sadness and anticipation. I was genuinely sorry to leave behind the team members who had worked so hard to build something special, but I was also eager to see how Victoria would handle the challenges that were coming her way. The first signs of trouble appeared exactly 3 weeks after my departure. I learned about it through Alex Thompson, my former cybersecurity specialist, who called me on a Tuesday evening in early April. "Marcus, something weird is happening with the platform," Alex said, his voice tight with concern. "We're getting intermittent errors in the prediction algorithms, but none of us can figure out what's causing them." "What kind of errors?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "The accuracy ratings are fluctuating randomly. Sometimes the predictions are spot on, sometimes they're way off. Victoria thinks it's a data quality issue, but I've checked the inputs multiple times, and they're clean." I made sympathetic sounds while Alex described the problems they were encountering. The algorithmic modifications I had implemented were working exactly as designed, introducing random variations that would gradually reduce the platform's reliability without providing clear diagnostic information. "Have you checked the system logs?" I asked. "That's the weird part," Alex replied. "The logs show that everything is functioning normally. All the performance metrics are within acceptable ranges, all the processes are completing successfully, but the outputs are inconsistent." This was exactly what I had planned. The logging modifications I had made in Phase 1 of my sabotage were preventing the team from identifying the source of the problems they were experiencing. "It's probably just a temporary glitch," I suggested. "Enterprise software can be finicky sometimes. Have you tried running the standard diagnostic procedures? Victoria has us following those emergency protocols you documented, but they don't seem to be helping." I smiled as Alex unknowingly confirmed that Victoria was implementing the very procedures that would accelerate the platform's degradation. The emergency protocols I had documented were designed to look like legitimate troubleshooting steps, while actually making the problems worse. Over the following weeks, I received regular updates from my former colleagues as they struggled to understand what was happening to the platform. Each conversation confirmed that my sabotage was proceeding exactly as planned. David Rodriguez called to complain about mysterious database performance issues that seemed to appear and disappear without explanation. Jennifer Walsh reported that the machine learning models were producing inconsistent results despite being fed identical training data. Rebecca Foster described quality assurance tests that would pass on Monday and fail on Tuesday, even though no changes had been made to the system. Most importantly, Victoria was becoming increasingly frustrated with her inability to solve problems that seemed to have no rational explanation. "She's convinced that someone is sabotaging the system," Sarah Kim told me during a coffee meeting in downtown Seattle. "She's had Alex run multiple security audits, but he can't find any evidence of external interference." "What does Robert think?" I asked. "He's starting to lose confidence in her," Sarah admitted. "The board is asking questions about why the platform's performance has declined since you left. Victoria keeps blaming it on legacy code and outdated architecture, but the problems didn't exist when you were here." By May 2024, the situation at TechFlow had deteriorated significantly. The platform's prediction accuracy had dropped from 94% to 78%, and several major clients were beginning to complain about inconsistent results. Victoria had hired expensive consulting firms to analyze the system, but their recommendations were based on the false information in my final documentation. The consultants suggested implementing exactly the kinds of changes that Victoria had been advocating, simplifying the user interface, reducing system complexity, and modernizing the codebase. What they didn't understand was that the platform's complexity wasn't accidental. It was necessary to handle the enormous technical challenges of real-time supply chain prediction. Victoria seized on the consultant's recommendations as validation of her approach. She announced a comprehensive modernization initiative that would streamline the platform's architecture, and improve user experience. The initiative involved making exactly the kinds of changes that would trigger the most devastating aspects of my sabotage. We're going to rebuild the core prediction engine from scratch, Victoria announced during a company-wide meeting. The current system is too complicated and too dependent on legacy code. Our new architecture will be simpler, faster, and more reliable. The irony was perfect. Victoria was proposing to fix the platform's problems by implementing changes that would make those problems exponentially worse. The modernization initiative began in June 2024, and its effects were immediately catastrophic. As Victoria's team attempted to modify the core algorithms, they triggered several of the logic bombs I had planted throughout the system. The first bomb activated when they tried to update the machine learning models, causing a cascade failure that corrupted weeks of training data. "It's like the system is fighting us," one of the junior developers complained during a team meeting that Alex later described to me. "Every time we try to make improvements, something else breaks." Victoria's response was to hire more consultants and implement more aggressive changes. She was convinced that the solution to the platform's problems was to completely overhaul its architecture, not understanding that each modification was making the situation worse. The second logic bomb activated in July when the database reached the size threshold I had programmed. The resulting data corruption was subtle but devastating. Historical prediction data was gradually altered in ways that made it impossible to use for training machine learning models. The corruption was designed to look like hardware failure, and Victoria immediately blamed the hosting company for providing inadequate infrastructure. "We need to migrate to a more robust cloud platform," Victoria announced. "Our current hosting arrangement clearly can't handle the demands of enterprise-scale software." The migration project consumed enormous resources and took weeks to complete, but it had no effect on the platform's performance because the problems weren't related to hosting infrastructure. The corruption was embedded in the data itself, and moving it to new servers simply moved the corruption along with everything else. By August 2024, TechFlow was in crisis mode. The platform's prediction accuracy had dropped below 60%, making it essentially useless for enterprise supply chain management. Major clients were canceling contracts and demanding refunds. The company's stock price had fallen by 70%, and several board members were calling for Victoria's immediate removal. Robert, faced with the collapse of his company's primary revenue source, finally began to understand the magnitude of the disaster that Victoria's leadership had created. But by then it was too late to reverse the damage. The third and most devastating logic bomb was activated in September, when Victoria's team attempted to implement the new prediction engine they had been developing. The bomb was triggered by specific code patterns that indicated someone was trying to replace the core algorithms, and its effects were immediate and catastrophic. The platform's entire prediction system collapsed, taking down not just the user-facing applications, but also the underlying data processing infrastructure. Client dashboards displayed error messages, automated reports failed to generate, and the real-time monitoring systems that had been the platform's greatest strength simply stopped functioning. "Everything is broken," Alex told me during a panicked phone call. "The entire platform is down, and we can't figure out how to fix it." Victoria is convinced that we're under some kind of sophisticated cyber attack, but all our security systems show normal activity. The beauty of the logic bomb was that it had been designed to look exactly like a cyber attack. The system failures followed patterns that were consistent with advanced persistent threats, and the corruption was spread across multiple servers in ways that suggested coordinated external interference. Victoria immediately called in the FBI's cybercrime division, convinced that TechFlow was the victim of corporate espionage. Federal agents spent weeks analyzing the system, but they found no evidence of external penetration because there hadn't been any. The destruction had come from within, hidden in code that I had written months earlier. "The investigation is ongoing," Robert announced during an emergency board meeting. But preliminary findings suggest that we were targeted by a highly sophisticated attack designed specifically to compromise our platform's functionality. The board wasn't satisfied with excuses. TechFlow's revenue had dropped by 85% in 6 months, and the company was hemorrhaging money as clients demanded compensation for the platform's failures. Several major investors were threatening to pull out entirely, and there was serious discussion about bankruptcy proceedings. In October 2024, the board voted to remove Victoria from her position as CTO, but the damage was already done. The platform was beyond repair, the client base had been destroyed, and the company's reputation in the industry was in ruins. "We need someone who understands the system," Robert said during the board meeting where Victoria was fired. "Someone who can restore the platform to its original functionality." Several board members suggested that the company should try to rehire me, but Robert explained that I had already accepted a position with a competing firm and was unlikely to return. What he didn't mention was that he was too proud to admit that firing me had been a catastrophic mistake. TechFlow Solutions declared bankruptcy in November 2024, less than 8 months after I had left the company. The platform that had once been valued at over $200 million was sold for parts to a larger competitor, who planned to use some of its components in their own products. Victoria Sterling disappeared from the tech industry entirely. Her LinkedIn profile was quietly deleted, and she never worked in technology again. Robert Hawkins lost his entire investment in the company and was forced to file for personal bankruptcy when investors sued him for mismanagement. The former employees of TechFlow scattered to other companies throughout the industry. Most of them found new positions quickly, as their experience with the Nexus platform was still considered valuable, despite its ultimate failure. But they all carried with them the knowledge that they had been part of something special that had been destroyed by corporate politics and incompetent leadership. As for me, I watched the destruction of TechFlow from my new position as Chief Technology Officer at Meridian Analytics, a startup that was developing next-generation supply chain optimization tools. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now building a competitor to the platform I had created and destroyed. But the satisfaction of my revenge was complicated by genuine sadness about what had been lost. The Nexus platform really had been revolutionary, and its destruction represented the loss of something that could have transformed entire industries. Sometimes, in the quiet moments between meetings at my new job, I wondered if there had been another way to handle the situation at TechFlow. Could I have found a path that would have preserved the platform while still exposing Victoria's incompetence? Could I have protected my life's work without destroying the company that had made it possible? But then I remembered Robert's betrayal, Victoria's arrogance, and the systematic destruction of everything I had worked to build, and I knew that I had made the only choice that would ensure they faced consequences for their actions. The nuclear option had worked exactly as planned. The phone call that changed everything came on a cold December morning in 2024, exactly 1 month after TechFlow Solutions had officially closed its doors. I was in my new office at Meridian Analytics, reviewing architectural specifications for our next-generation supply chain platform, when my assistant informed me that someone named Detective Lisa Morrison from the Seattle Police Department was on the line. "Mr. Chen, I'm calling regarding an ongoing investigation into the collapse of TechFlow Solutions," Detective Morrison said, her voice professional but with an undertone that immediately put me on edge. "We'd like to schedule a time to speak with you about your experience with the company." My heart rate spiked, but I kept my voice steady. "Of course, Detective. I'm happy to help with whatever information I can provide. Would you be available to come to the station tomorrow afternoon? Say, 2 p.m.? Certainly. May I ask what this is regarding specifically? There have been some allegations made about the circumstances surrounding the platform's failure. We're interviewing all former employees who had significant technical knowledge of the system." After hanging up, I sat in my office staring out at the Seattle skyline, my mind racing through possibilities. Had someone discovered evidence of my sabotage? Had Victoria or Robert somehow figured out what I had done? Or was this simply a routine investigation into corporate malfeasance? That evening, I called my attorney, Patricia Goldman, who had handled my employment contract negotiations over the years. After explaining the situation, she agreed to accompany me to the police station. "Marcus, I need you to be completely honest with me," Patricia said during our preparatory meeting. "Is there anything you did at TechFlow that could be construed as corporate sabotage or intentional damage to company property?" I had known this moment would come eventually, but I still wasn't prepared for it. After a long pause, I told Patricia everything: the sabotage plan, the logic bombs, the systematic destruction of the platform's functionality. Her expression grew increasingly grave as I described the sophistication of what I had done. "Jesus, Marcus," she said when I finished. "Do you understand the potential legal consequences of what you're describing? Corporate sabotage, destruction of property, potentially even criminal conspiracy charges. We're talking about millions of dollars in damages." "But they stole my life's work," I protested. "They gave my project to an unqualified person who was sleeping with the CEO. I built that platform. It was mine." "Legally speaking, it belonged to TechFlow Solutions," Patricia replied firmly. "Your employment contract clearly stated that all work products belonged to the company. What you did was illegal, regardless of how unfairly you were treated." The next afternoon, I found myself sitting in a sterile interrogation room at the Seattle Police Department, with Detective Morrison across from me and Patricia at my side. The detective was younger than I had expected, probably in her early 30s, with sharp eyes that seemed to see right through any attempt at deception. "Mr. Chen, thank you for coming in voluntarily," Detective Morrison began. "We're investigating allegations that the failure of the Nexus platform at TechFlow Solutions may not have been entirely due to the technical issues that were publicly reported." "What kind of allegations?" I asked, my mouth dry despite my attempts to appear calm. "We've received information suggesting that the platform's failure may have been the result of deliberate sabotage by someone with intimate knowledge of its architecture." She opened a file folder and pulled out several printed documents. "Someone who would have had the access and expertise necessary to cause the kind of damage that ultimately destroyed the company." My blood ran cold as I recognized the documents she was showing me. They were excerpts from my final technical report, the documentation I had provided during my last weeks at TechFlow. But these pages had been annotated with handwritten notes that highlighted inconsistencies and technical impossibilities in my descriptions. "Where did you get these?" I asked. "Alex Thompson, your former cybersecurity specialist, brought them to our attention. He spent months analyzing the platform's failure, and he's identified several anomalies that suggest the problems weren't caused by external factors or system degradation." Detective Morrison spread out more documents, technical analyses, code reviews, and timeline reconstructions that Alex had apparently been working on since the company's collapse. The level of detail was impressive and terrifying. Alex had managed to trace many of the platform's problems back to specific changes that had been made during my final months at the company. "Mr. Thompson has indicated that you were the only person with both the access and the knowledge necessary to make these kinds of modifications without detection," Detective Morrison continued. "He's also provided us with evidence that some of the, quote, emergency procedures you documented were actually designed to exacerbate the problems rather than solve them." I looked at Patricia, who gave me a slight nod. We had discussed this possibility, and she had advised me to remain silent if confronted with specific evidence. "Detective, my client was a dedicated employee who worked tirelessly to build TechFlow's platform," Patricia said. "Any suggestions that he deliberately sabotaged his own work are not only unfounded but frankly insulting to someone who sacrificed years of his life for that company." "I understand your position, Ms. Goldman," Detective Morrison replied, "but we have technical evidence that suggests otherwise. Mr. Chen, can you explain why the emergency procedures you documented would have the effect of accelerating system degradation rather than preventing it?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Alex had done his homework, and he had identified the exact mechanisms I had used to disguise my sabotage as legitimate maintenance procedures. There was no innocent explanation for what I had done. "I think we're done here," Patricia said, standing up. "Unless you're prepared to formally charge my client with something, we'll be leaving." Detective Morrison didn't try to stop us, but her final words followed us out of the room. "Mr. Chen, we'll be continuing our investigation. I'd advise you to remain available for further questioning." The drive back to my office was silent. Patricia finally spoke as we pulled into the parking garage of my building. "They don't have enough evidence to charge you yet, but they're building a case," she said. "Alex Thompson is clearly cooperating with the investigation, and if he can provide them with technical proof of sabotage, you could be facing serious criminal charges. What do you recommend?" "Honestly, you need to consider whether it might be better to come forward voluntarily. If you cooperate with the investigation and express genuine remorse, we might be able to negotiate a plea agreement that would avoid prison time." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Alex. Quiet, methodical Alex, who had always been more interested in solving technical puzzles than playing office politics. Of all my former colleagues, he was the one I had least expected to turn detective. But as I thought about it more, I realized that Alex's investigation wasn't about revenge or personal animosity. He was simply doing what he had always done, methodically analyzing systems to understand how they worked and why they failed. The fact that his analysis had led him to discover my sabotage was almost inevitable. Over the following weeks, I learned more about Alex's investigation through conversations with other former TechFlow employees. Apparently, he had become obsessed with understanding what had gone wrong with the platform, spending his unemployment benefits on cloud computing resources to reconstruct and analyze the system's behavior during its final months. He's been working on it like it's his full-time job, Sarah Kim told me during another coffee meeting. He's convinced that someone deliberately destroyed the platform, and he won't let it go until he proves it. What do the others think? Most people think he's wasting his time, Sarah admitted. Jennifer believes it was just a combination of technical debt and poor management decisions. David thinks the problems were caused by Victoria's incompetent leadership. But Alex is convinced there's more to it. The investigation continued throughout the winter of 2024-2025. Detective Morrison called me in for 2 more interviews, each time presenting additional evidence that Alex had uncovered. He had identified the specific code modifications I had made, traced the logic bombs back to their implementation dates, and even discovered the subtle algorithmic changes that had caused the platform's accuracy to degrade. During the 3rd interview, Detective Morrison presented me with what she called the smoking gun, a detailed reconstruction of the platform's behavior that showed how my documented emergency procedures would inevitably lead to system failure. Mr. Chen, we now have technical evidence that proves the Nexus platform was deliberately sabotaged, she said. We know how it was done, when it was done, and who had the access necessary to do it. The only question remaining is whether you're going to continue denying your involvement. I looked at Patricia, who had been growing increasingly concerned as the evidence mounted against me. We both knew that the technical proof was overwhelming. There was no innocent explanation for what Alex had discovered. Detective, my client maintains his innocence, Patricia said, but her voice lacked conviction. Ms. Goldman, we're prepared to file formal charges against your client for corporate sabotage, destruction of property, and conspiracy to defraud. The damages exceed $200 million, which puts this in the category of major felony charges with potential prison sentences of 15 to 20 years. The number hit me like a physical blow. 20 years in prison for destroying a platform that I had created in the first place seemed surreal, but I understood that the legal system didn't care about the moral complexities of corporate betrayal. That evening, Patricia and I had the most difficult conversation of my professional life. Marcus, you need to face reality, she said. They have enough evidence to convict you, and the potential sentences are devastating. Your best option at this point is to negotiate a plea agreement. What would that involve? Full confession, cooperation with the investigation, restitution to the victims, and probably some prison time. But we might be able to get it reduced to 3 to 5 years instead of 15 to 20. The thought of spending even 3 years in prison was terrifying, but the alternative was potentially spending the rest of my productive life behind bars. There's something else you need to consider, Patricia continued. If this goes to trial, everything will become public. The technical details of what you did, the reasons behind it, the full scope of the damage you caused. Your reputation in the tech industry will be completely destroyed. I spent the next week agonizing over the decision. On one hand, accepting a plea agreement would mean admitting guilt and facing the consequences of my actions. On the other hand, fighting the charges would likely result in a much harsher sentence and complete public humiliation. The decision was made for me when Detective Morrison called with news that changed everything. Mr. Chen, we've discovered something that significantly impacts our investigation, she said. We found evidence that Robert Hawkins and Victoria Sterling were engaged in fraudulent activities that may have contributed to the company's collapse. What kind of fraudulent activities? Financial irregularities, inflated revenue reports to investors, and misrepresentation of the platform's capabilities to potential clients. It appears that they were using the platform's early success to raise investment capital based on false projections. In December 2025, Robert Hawkins was convicted on all charges and sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Victoria Sterling received 8 years for her role in the conspiracy. Both were ordered to pay millions of dollars in restitution to the investors they had defrauded. As I walked out of the courthouse after the sentencing hearing, I felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and melancholy. Robert and Victoria had finally faced consequences for their actions, but the cost had been enormous, not just to them, but to everyone who had been touched by the collapse of TechFlow Solutions. The platform that could have revolutionized supply chain management was gone forever. The team that had worked so hard to build something special had been scattered to the winds. And I had played a central role in destroying something that I had once loved more than anything else in my life. But as I looked back on everything that had happened, I knew that I had made the only choice that would ensure justice was served. Sometimes, the only way to protect something you've built is to destroy it before someone else can use it to cause even greater harm. The nuclear option had worked exactly as planned, but the fallout had been more extensive and more complicated than I could ever have imagined. 3 years have passed since the federal courthouse doors closed behind Robert Hawkins and Victoria Sterling. As I sit in my corner office at Meridian Analytics, now the company's chief technology officer and co-founder, I often reflect on the strange journey that brought me here. The aftermath of the TechFlow scandal rippled through the Seattle tech community in ways I never anticipated. Our successful prosecution became a cautionary tale taught in business schools, while the technical details of my sabotage became legendary among software engineers, though few knew I was the architect of that destruction. Meridian Analytics grew rapidly in the vacuum left by TechFlow's collapse. Our Phoenix supply chain intelligence platform, built from the ground up with lessons learned from both the successes and failures of the Nexus system, captured much of TechFlow's former market share. Within 18 months, we had secured contracts with 80% of TechFlow's former clients, generating $85 million in annual recurring revenue. But success felt different this time. I was no longer the lone genius working impossible hours in a converted storage room. We built Meridian with a distributed leadership structure, comprehensive documentation, and multiple layers of oversight that would prevent any single person from wielding the kind of destructive power I had possessed at TechFlow. The most unexpected development came in January 2026, when Sarah Kim approached me about joining Meridian as our VP of Engineering. She had spent the past year working at Microsoft, but the corporate environment hadn't suited her entrepreneurial spirit. "I know what happened at TechFlow, Marcus," she said during our lunch meeting overlooking Elliott Bay. "Alex told me everything. The sabotage, the investigation, your cooperation with the feds. I also know why you did it." My blood chilled. "Sarah, You don't need to explain," she interrupted. "Robert and Victoria were destroying something beautiful. And you found a way to stop them while exposing their real crimes. It was morally ambiguous, maybe, but ultimately justice was served." Sarah's perspective surprised me. I had expected judgment, anger, or at least disappointment from my former colleagues. Instead, she seemed to understand the impossible position I had been placed in. "The others know too," she continued. "David, Jennifer, Rebecca, Alex. We've all talked about it. None of us blame you for what you did. We blame Robert for putting you in a position where sabotage seemed like the only option." Her words lifted a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. The guilt over destroying the platform had been manageable, but the thought that my former teammates might hate me for it had been eating away at my peace of mind. Sarah joined Meridian that spring, followed by David Rodriguez in the summer and Jennifer Walsh in the fall. One by one, the original Nexus team reunited under our new banner, bringing with them the institutional knowledge and collaborative spirit that had made our first platform so revolutionary. The only holdout was Alex Thompson, who had become something of a celebrity in cybersecurity circles after his forensic analysis of the TechFlow collapse was published in several academic journals. He had founded his own consulting firm, specializing in corporate security audits and digital forensics. "I respect what you're building at Meridian," Alex told me when I approached him about joining our team, "but I think I can do more good as an independent watchdog." What happened at TechFlow showed me that brilliant people can make terrible decisions when they feel cornered. Someone needs to be watching for the warning signs. His decision to remain independent was probably wise. Alex's analysis had not only exposed my sabotage, but had also become the foundation for new industry standards around software security and corporate oversight. His work had helped prevent other companies from suffering TechFlow's fate. The most satisfying aspect of Meridian's success was watching our former clients thrive with properly designed technology. Global Tech Manufacturing, our first major client from the TechFlow days, had struggled for months after the Nexus platform's collapse. Their supply chain disruptions had increased by 300%, costing them over $40 million in the first quarter after TechFlow's bankruptcy. But after implementing our Phoenix platform, Global Tech's performance improved beyond even their original Nexus-era metrics. The new system's prediction accuracy reached 96%, higher than the original Nexus platform had ever achieved. More importantly, the system was stable, well-documented, and supported by a team of engineers who understood every aspect of its operation. "You've not only rebuilt what we lost," Global Tech's CEO told me during a client appreciation dinner, "you've made it better and more reliable than before." By late 2026, Meridian Analytics had become the undisputed leader in supply chain intelligence, with over 300 enterprise clients and international offices in London, Tokyo, and Sao Paulo. Our technology was being used to manage supply chains worth over $500 billion annually, and our platform had prevented an estimated $2.8 billion in supply chain disruptions since its launch. The financial success was gratifying, but what mattered most was that we had rebuilt something that had been lost. The revolutionary technology that Robert and Victoria had nearly destroyed through their greed and incompetence was alive again, stronger and more capable than ever. In December 2026, I received an unexpected letter forwarded through my attorney. The return address showed it was from Robert Hawkins, writing from the Federal Correctional Institution where he was serving his sentence. The letter was brief and handwritten. "Marcus, I know you'll probably never forgive me for what happened at TechFlow, and I don't expect you to, but I wanted you to know that I understand now what we threw away. I saw the news about Meridian's success, and I'm genuinely happy that you were able to rebuild what Victoria and I destroyed. You deserved better from me, and so did everyone else who trusted us with their careers. I hope someday I can find a way to make amends for the damage I caused. Robert." I read the letter 3 times before filing it away. Robert's apology felt sincere, but it couldn't undo the betrayal that had set everything in motion. Still, it provided a sense of closure I hadn't expected to receive. Victoria never reached out, and according to news reports, she had been disowned by her wealthy family and was serving her sentence in relative isolation. Her fall from privileged MBA to federal prisoner seemed like appropriate justice for someone who had tried to steal credit for work she had never understood. As 2027 began, I found myself in a position I had never imagined possible. Meridian Analytics was valued at over $800 million, making me one of the wealthiest tech entrepreneurs in Seattle. More importantly, we had created a company culture that valued technical excellence, ethical leadership, and collaborative innovation. The platform we had built was being used by companies around the world to optimize their operations and reduce waste. Our technology was helping to create more efficient global supply chains, reducing environmental impact, and supporting sustainable business practices. The work we were doing mattered in ways that went far beyond financial success. On a quiet Sunday evening in March 2027, I stood in our main conference room looking out at the Seattle skyline. The building that had once housed TechFlow Solutions was visible in the distance, now occupied by a different company that had no idea of the drama that had once unfolded within its walls. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Team dinner tonight at Pike Place. You in?" I smiled as I typed back, "Absolutely, see you there." Walking toward the elevator, I reflected on the strange path that had brought me to this moment. The sabotage of the Nexus platform had been the most destructive thing I had ever done, but it had also led to the most creative and fulfilling period of my career. Sometimes, you have to burn something down completely before you can rebuild it properly. The nuclear option had worked exactly as planned. but the fallout had created opportunities I never could have imagined. TechFlow Solutions was gone forever, but its true legacy lived on in the technology we were building at Meridian Analytics. The platform that Robert and Victoria had tried to steal and corrupt was stronger than ever, serving clients around the world and pushing the boundaries of what enterprise software could achieve. As the elevator doors closed and I headed down to street level, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Justice had been served, the technology had been preserved and improved, and the team that had created something revolutionary was back together again. The revenge was complete, but more importantly, the work continued. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.